So welcome to all the people who are entering the space now. Welcome to Avid Reader and welcome to this event. Imagine, if you will, that it is an incredibly chilly night for Brisbane, normally a balmy winter, but tonight is one of the chilliest winter nights that we have. So imagine that we're all rugged up at Avid Reader on the back deck. No social distancing, of course, because the pandemic never happened. In this alternate reality where we have these Zoom events, there is no pandemic and we're all snuggling on the back deck, keeping ourselves warm, drinking a nice glass of vino, waiting for the event to begin. So I'm still just letting in some more people into the event space. But as I do so, I will let you know a couple of things. I'm Chrissy Neen to start with. And first of all, there are several views you can use. A couple of views you can use on Zoom if you have not used Zoom before. At the top right-hand side of the screen, there's a little kind of bunch of dots, and you can click that to see the two different views. I recommend that you use the one where you just have one face on the screen at one time. It is much less confusing than all of you on the screen at the one time, but that is up to you. The other thing that I will just let you all know is that there is a chat function, and that chat function should be at the bottom of your screen. You will all be on mute and you'll be able to communicate via chat. And to show you where that is, I'm going to pop in a link to the book, and also to let you know that there is a discount code for people who attend our event tonight for 24 hours on our website. If you choose to buy books, you'll get 10% off, not just the book of the moment, but all of your book purchases. There'll be 10% off for 24 hours after this event. And that is the link for the Constant Rabbit. Now, I think I will just start proceedings and let people in slowly as they arrive. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we are on. In this area, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to any other elders who are here tonight. And to also acknowledge that in this Zoom universe, we are going out onto the lands of many other different language groups of traditional owners all around Australia. And I would like to acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging as well, and to say that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. Now, it's my great pleasure tonight to beam you all over to Old South Wales, where we are conducting this event tonight. We've been to London, we've been to New York, we've been to Wisconsin, and now we're in Old South Wales. So I'd like to introduce you to our guest tonight, who is Jasper Fforde, who spent 20 years in the film business before debuting on the New York Times bestseller list with The Air Affair in 2001. Since then, he has written another 13 novels, perhaps, including the #1 Sunday Times bestseller, One of Our Thursdays is Missing, and the last Dragon Slayer series adapted for television by Sky. Tonight, we're here to celebrate the release of The Constant Rabbit, the new book by Jasper Fforde. So welcome, Jasper.
Thank you. Thank you.
And in conversation with Jasper, we have the wonderful Emma Kate Lewis. Emma Kate is an Irish-English writer who was born in Malta and now lives and works in Australia. Her writing has been published by the likes of VoiceWorks, Hot Chicks with Big Brains, and Commonwealth Writers. She is currently a finalist in the 2020 South by Southwest David Carr Prize. So I'm going to hand over now to Emma Kate Lewis. Welcome, Emma.
Thanks so much, Chrissy. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you, Jasper, for agreeing to speak with me this evening. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am broadcasting from, the Yagara and Turrbal people, And I also pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I absolutely loved reading your novel, Jasper, The Constance Rabbit.
Good.
It is phenomenal. I found it really, really clever and funny. Just for a bit of context for everybody joining us tonight, if you haven't read it yet, it's an allegorical tale about the aftermath of a spontaneous anthropomorphic event in 1945 that results in a small number of human-sized, highly intelligent talking rabbits. And by 2020, which is when the novel begins, the rabbit population has reached over 1 million in the UK, and the United Kingdom Anti-Rabbit Party, better known as UKARP, is in power. And it's at this point in history that we meet our narrator, Peter Knox, who is a single dad, and he lives in a conservative small town and reluctantly works as a rabbit spotter for the Rabbit Compliance Task Force, who ensure that the rabbits live very different lives according to very different rules than those that govern their entirely human counterparts. So it sounds dark, and it is, but it's also very entertaining and very funny, as I mentioned, and it tackles some serious issues in a bunch of imaginative ways. So I'd like to start by asking you, Jasper, where did this bizarre and brilliant idea for this story come from, and why rabbits?
Oh gosh. Okay. Right. Well, that's the hour sorted. Totally. Right. Okay. So where did this idea come from? I found that. What's the best way to start this? I suppose that when you come to writing, you bring a skill to it. You bring a skill which is either being able to do fantastic prose, being able to create amazing characters, and all manner of things like that, or a great sort of visual sense of how beautiful something is, and then the ability to be able to describe it. So what I brought to it, and where I come from in my writing, is a way of putting silly ideas together. I'm basically an ideas person, and I can put these strange stuff together. And then the skill for me, the skill I had to learn, was how to actually make that work in 100,000 words. So you can have silly ideas, and they can be really great fun. But of course, if you can't actually put that down in a way that's going to make sense and it's going to entertain readers, then it doesn't work. So my 13 years I spent trying to write books, and that's where I began. Way long time ago. It took me a long time, but what I was doing was essentially enabling to write about the imaginative flights of fancy that I have. Okay, so how this all began was there is. When I see fictional characters, I was watching Yellow Submarine right now. If anyone hasn't seen the Yellow Submarine, the Beatles film, you have to see it. I'm sure you've all seen it. It's an amazing film. I think it's certainly in my top 10, and it's just a beautiful, endless sort of smorgasbord of sort of imagination and wonder, with a bit of Beatles music chucked in. Now I got to wondering, as I often do, what's happened to the characters after the film ends, right? It's like, what did Ferris Bueller do next? This is interesting to me, because of course, when you look at a movie or you read a book, as far as we, the viewer, are concerned, this is a real slice of life. And we presuppose that these characters had a life before and they're going to have a life afterwards. So I got to wondering what Glove did. You remember the glove, this sort of flying glove that used to belong to the Blue Meanies, in the Yellow Submarine. And what would happen, because if you recall, Pepperland was liberated by the Beatles, and the Blue Meanies were on the run, and then there would have been a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and then Glove and the Apple Bonkers and the Snapping Turk. Were they followers? Were they mercenaries? How do you treat them like that? And then, of course, you think, well, Pepperland, it would be all about forgiveness and harmony and that kind of stuff. And that got me to thinking about these stories about characters. And then for some reason, I segued onto this animated rabbit that was used to sell Cadbury's caramel chocolates in the 80s, right? And you can see her on YouTube, and it ridiculously sort of voluptual, sort of over-sexualized, bizarre comedy cartoon rabbit, voiced by Miriam Margolyes in a West Country accent. It's the most bizarre thing you can imagine. And I was thinking, okay, what was this the only acting gig she got? You know, what did she do after this? Did she go on TV, you know, in movies? And then as I'm sort of walking along, because I often have the ideas when I'm walking, I thought, no, she had a part in Pulp Fiction. Remember Tarantino, right? When Tarantino was making Pulp Fiction, he said, I want a rabbit because I've got this situation called the bunny incident, right? And it's that whole sequence where they have to clear up because they have an accident because they shoot the guy in the back of the car. And I thought, no, it's the bunny incident because he actually wants them to get all that out of the way because his wife, who is a rabbit, is coming home. And she goes to America. I know this is very long-winded and everything, but it gives us an idea about how I'm thinking. So she goes to America, this rabbit, and she does the part, and then they get cold feet and they go, you know, I just don't think the time is right to have a rabbit, you know, in your movie, Quentin. He goes, well, okay. And they pull her, but they still call it the Bonnie incident now. And then all the dialogue with the coffee, you know, this is good coffee and all that. So it was originally carrot juice, and that makes so much more sense. And I'm going, yes, this is like true. I can see this now. So she goes back to the UK, and that's where it kind of kicked off, right? She couldn't get the job because there was clearly, you know, anti-rabbit sentiment in Hollywood. Where does she go home? Where does she live? What does she do? How does she get work? And then all of a sudden, I suddenly thought, there are rabbits living in the UK. And then it's a question of how did they get there? What are the rules of this world? What kind of position do they have in society? And then all of a sudden, this sort of single idea where I'm thinking about, you know, what happened to the glove after the yellow submarine suddenly spreads and darkens literally within the space of about 15 minutes. And once I'd gone on to the rabbits and that there were 1 million of them living in the UK, and they're originally welcomed, and now they're kind of feared and reviled and disliked. And the humans want to rehome them in Wales, which is a euphemism for putting to sleep. Then I thought, yes, this is it. And it's happening around the Brexit vote. So half of it is my sort of Brexit anger book about, you know, Britain and everything like that. But that's a very long answer. But I mean, that's essentially, you know, where the idea originated.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. Thank you. And it tackles, as you just mentioned, Brexit. And of course, this novel tackles a lot of serious issues. And I'm wondering how you managed to do so without trivializing them, because it is very funny. So can you talk a little bit about this? Because you're also talking about, very serious discrimination and yeah, a lot of very difficult issues.
Yeah, I mean, this was the thing that I battled with most of all. I mean, ultimately, I came down to the conclusion that I had to be writing about something that I knew about. Right? I couldn't put myself into the position of someone who had been discriminated against, because I have never been discriminated against. In fact, never. I mean, you know, in 59 years, you know, that's what, not never as in, you know, maybe once or twice. It's like never as in never. And that's obviously not something I share with my, you know, a lot of fellow Britons. But I can't speak for anyone who is in that position. But I thought, well, no, I'm actually in a really good position because I haven't been discriminated against. Then I must have actually benefited from a discrimination tactic within the UK. So I must have benefits accrued to me, defaulted to me by who I am and what I look like. So I thought, okay, I am in a good position to talk about this because I can talk about the other side of actually being in a discriminatory society without kind of really knowing it or even tacitly approving of it, because you think, well, everything's fine. You know, what's wrong? I mean, I'm living a great life. You know, what's the problem? And I think that's coming from that position and saying, no, this is about complicity. This is essentially what we're looking at. But also when you use allegories, you can tackle a lot of very, very dark subjects with comedy. And I think that's something that's been happening for a very, very long time. I mean, goes way back to Greek tragedy. And if you think about, I was chatting to someone about this, and I was going, think of a comedy that's very dark, and then you're laughing one moment, and then it's really dark the next. You know, something that's like really mainstream. And they went, well, what about MASH on the telly? You know, the 4077, because everyone, it's essentially what would you call it? It's a workplace comedy. I'd define MASH as a workplace comedy. And it's very funny, and they're laughing, and it's hysterically funny. And then bang, you're in the theatre, and people are dying. People are dying in front of you on the operating table. And I'm going, no, that's what we're kind of doing here. I'm just trying to mix that. But ultimately, you know, someone could say, no, you're treating this, and it's frivolous, and you're basically an arse, Fforde. And, you know, well, boo-hoo. If someone calls me that, you know, is that the worst that can happen? A 59-year-old privileged white guy being called a bit of an arse? You know, I think other people have a lot harder things to worry about on a daily basis than that. So, and, you know, you have to say something. If you see all this crap going around in the world, and you suddenly have this realization that, you know, that we Brits are not the wonderful, funny, beautiful, you know, accepting people that we are, then you kind of have to say something in the way that you know how to say things. So I thought, well, sod it, let's write it and do it.
And that's kind of, that leads nicely into my next question, actually, because your narrator, Knox, is also grappling with that level of privilege that he's afforded, and very much considers himself to be very accepting of the rabbits in country, but he also tends to take a back seat. So can you talk a little bit about the process of creating your narrator?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, this is Peter Knox. He's a nice guy. You know, he's a nice guy, using bunny's ears there. But he's a little bit spineless, and his journey is not complete by the end of the book. And I think that was very important. He can't emerge clear and free and without guilt and expunged. It's a question of, I think, you know, what he can find out about himself, and that what he does going forward is perhaps, you know, maybe how he'll define himself in the future. But I think I wanted him to be the kind of slightly someone who just, not stupid, but who just isn't looking around, who doesn't really understand his actions. He works for the Rabbit Compliance Task Force, as you said, but he doesn't kind of think it's that bad. You know, well, if I didn't do it, you know, someone else would, and I need the pension, and I've got my daughter, and all this sort of stuff. And I just wanted him to be in this position where he doesn't like it, but clearly he approves of it. And this notion of, you know, that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. So he was, yeah, very much an everyman. But I think also what I like doing, often in my books, I will have either strong female roles or a protagonist who is a weaker male who then comes into contact with a very strong sort of female character. And I think that also happens here with Peter in quite an interesting way. And I think the relationship between Peter and Constance, Connie, the rabbit who lives next door, is a very interesting one, which I liked a great deal. And it excited me because Connie doesn't work as a human character. She works as a rabbit character. You know, she understands, and she is forgiving, and, you know, a fantastic, a better human than a human is. And it was sort of just playing with those that I think I like so much. But yeah, he's just a little bit spineless, but maybe he learns a thing or two at the end of it.
Yeah, I think he does. Can you tell us a bit about the rabbits, how you created the human rabbits? And Connie.
I think it was, yeah, Connie and our husband Doc. I think it was it's a kind of interesting sort of take, because the British have a very clear idea about what being British is like, I think, you know, about sort of laughing in the face of diversity and the sort of quiet dignity and all this kind of things. And then I was kind of looking at people who had been discriminated against for a very long time. And they were exhibiting far more of those traits of which we call Britishness than the people who were doing the discriminating. So there was this very weird kind of inversion. You know, you can't be British, so I'm going to heap all these indignities upon you. And the fact that you deal with them for years and decades with a quiet dignity is actually, I think, more British than the person who's claiming they're not British, if you like. So what I was trying to do is make rabbits better and greater and nicer and exhibiting far better qualities than the people who are trying to push them out for being different. So it was actually great fun, because I think what you do often when you're writing is you're trying to improve a flawed world. And with the rabbits, I could actually take this and say, no, let's play with the rabbits and see how we can make humans slightly better. And then we can mirror that in the rabbits. And the way they look at things like, forgiveness and sustainability, and their position within the planet and the biosphere, and their relationship with other animals is I think a better way of looking at things. I mean, the book is as much about, perhaps you could say, as humans, about hominid supremacism, than it is about perhaps discrimination. So the relationship that we have with animals is a very confused relationship. And I wanted to sort of, mirror that perhaps in the relationship that humans have with rabbits.
Yeah, and there aren't just rabbits who have been affected by the Great Event. There's also foxes and weasels and a whole array of characters. So what made you decide to include those, and in smaller numbers as well?
Yeah, it worked quite well, actually, because the rabbits being, we kind of see them as sort of passive. Rabbits are kind of, they're prey, essentially. And using foxes and weasels who are actually, carnivorous, they're hunters. So you could play with their characters in a different way. And it's kind of, foxes and weasels are used by humans to do their dirty work. And I think it sort of hints towards what kind of people or creatures humans will ally with in order to get, unpleasant work done. And I think there's an understanding also that even after all the work is done, that the foxes and the weasels could be next once the rabbits are got rid of. So there's also some interesting points there, perhaps. But it's just weasels and foxes. They kind of write themselves, really, in the same way that rabbits do, to be honest. And that's the fun thing about anthropomorphizing. What's not to like about anthropomorphizing creatures. And this has been done for hundreds and hundreds of years, because you take the attributes of the animal and the attributes of a human, and you mix them together. And in that curious little space, there is a lot of potential for comedy and drama, because the rabbits in my book, they're not really rabbits, they're not really humans, they're kind of human-full or human-like, but they're not humans, and they're not really rabbits either. And I think that's the fun about it.
Yeah. Which was your favorite scene to write, or one of your favorite scenes to write?
I think probably when Pete, one of the first scenes I wrote was when Peter goes round to dinner with the rabbits, and I think that's great fun, because he's a kind of fish out of water. He kind of knows about rabbits but doesn't know about rabbits, and he finds himself trying to sort of keep up with the rabbits' slightly strange way of doing things, but he's very much sort of alien in their house. And they're very sort of upbeat and funny, and it really gives you an introduction to the rabbit way of life, and what they do and how they react and everything else. So I kind of like that sequence quite a lot, actually. It was originally much longer. It was actually, I think, twice as long. I just couldn't stop it. It just went on for about 6,000-10,000 words. This very, very long, a dinner party sequence. But I had to chop it up, and it's migrated to several places in the book, just so, because you can't put it together in one place too much. So no, it's been stretched out a bit. But I think that was quite fun. It's also conversational stuff, what they like to do. And there was something, I can't remember, there was, all sorts of little aspects that I quite like. Yeah.
In your acknowledgements at the end of the book, you actually thank your agent and editor for having faith in this idea after what you describe as a very troublesome first draft. So you mentioning having to cut this dinner scene in half reminded me of that. So how did the story evolve from its early days and that original first draft into what it's become today?
Well, the original first draft is pretty much what you see there, but it was much longer. And I think there were some aspects of it that had flopped over into frivolousness. And I think I'd used some aspects of human on human cruelty that definitely had no place in the book. And I was still sort of getting all sort of angsty over the tone of the piece as well, because it's a funny book, and there are some good gags in there and some long burn setups and everything, which I really like. And I think it was that, and they said no, Jasper, this is okay. I think it works. Maybe trim it here and there and everything. But it was, it was me. I think it was me having trouble with the book rather than them saying, it's terrible. You've got to change everything. The book was pretty much complete, but it just needed. They were really good because they're extremely supportive, the pair of them, and said, no, Jasper, this does work, and stop fretting needlessly, get on with it and do what you want to do, and don't worry, just write it. I think it's good. And so to that, I'm very grateful.
That's great. What's it been like releasing a new novel in 2020? I'm sure you've had this question before. And what challenges do you think that this pandemic is presenting to writers who are currently working on new pieces themselves?
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, it's interesting because part of the thing that fascinates me about my book is it's very much a sort of post-Brexit book, although it's not. We're not really post-Brexit yet. We're still in it, as far as I'm concerned. And I think when something major happens, then the creative industries reflect it. And I was quite interested to see what kind of books were going to be coming out, in this sort of post-Brexit place. And there will be. I mean, we haven't seen them all yet. And it's not just books about Brexit, but I mean books which reflect feelings that one has had during the Brexit process, of which obviously this is one. So there's going to be interesting stuff about Brexit. But at the same time, yes. But of course, there's always a lag because it can take a month, it can take a year, 2 years to write a book and get it actually to the publishers. So 2020 themed pandemic books, and they may not necessarily be about the pandemic, but certainly aspects of it, of perhaps isolation and that kind of thing. We will expect to hit the bookshelves maybe in 18 months' time or slightly earlier, if possible. Already, I think Netflix are working on films which feature sort of aspects of the lockdown. But as regards events like this, I've been doing quite a few where I talk to my iPhone in my empty studio, which are quite odd. But I've been sort of doing these events for 20 years to audiences, and I think automatic just kicks in, and I just start nattering about my book, and eventually they're going, "Stop, Jasper, enough. You're done." But it's been good, and there's a lot of people emailing, of course, and sending messages and stuff like that backwards and forwards, and that's very nice for feedback, which I don't get at obviously at talks, and that's the thing I miss most actually is not just giving talks to an audience, which of course is lovely, but it's also the signing queue afterwards, which is vital. You're an author, this, because there's a contact there, and people can just ask questions and stuff like that, and blah blah blah, and that's really nice. And whenever I go to a talk, I generally bring things back. It's like going to festivals. I went to Brisbane quite recently for the festival there last year. And I brought a huge amount back, because I was looking at going to all these talks about restorative justice and things like that. So, and talking to people there and other writers. So you always bring things back. And with book launches, I do bring things back. So I think in that respect, maybe there's it hasn't been quite as good because it hasn't been meeting readers. But otherwise, it seems to have worked. Humans adapt, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. As Christy mentioned in her introduction, your career began in the film industry, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on some of the major differences between working in that industry and then beginning to write books, and sort of what have you learned from that process that you've taken into your novel writing?
I think thing about working on movies is that I wasn't writing movies. I was actually crew. I was film crew. So and because when you make a movie, you don't make it in sequence. You make it out of sequence. I mean, heavily out of sequence quite often. And so you're not kind of seeing the narrative develop, perhaps in that respect. But the thing about working in the movie industry is you're working on a film set that could be 70, 90 people, all of whom are very interesting people, and you get to visit amazing places and do extraordinary, bizarre, surreal things, and that was really, really good. But I think I always wanted to work in storytelling in some way. I've worked in story for my entire adult life. I mean, I started in the movies in 1980, a year out of school, and I'm still in the creative industries, either telling my own stories or helping other people tell theirs. And I think the segue, going from one to the other, was essentially that at the time, in the 80s and 90s, when I was working in movies, making your own movies was immensely expensive and difficult. You actually had to buy film and process film and edit it on film and all those kind of things. These days, making movies is immensely, technically, much, much easier. So I was trying to find a way to actually make my own movie and get funding. So I was writing my own scripts. This is back in sort of the 80s, early 80s. And they really weren't very good. So somebody said, why don't you write a treatment first, a short story, if you like, and then take that as the basis and then make the script from the short story. Because then in the short story, you've got all the themes and the atmosphere and the pace and the character. It's all kind of set out and you have a very clear overview of how the film will look. And I went, well, that sounds like quite a good idea. Let's try that. So I wrote a short story, which was meant to be a treatment. And then I thought, actually, I don't need the film. I don't need the film crew. I don't need to buy film. I can do everything on the page. And I think I might be able to do it because I was writing away and I was thinking, well, those words kind of sort of went together quite well. And that kind of joke worked. And that was it for me. That was when I started writing. It was, I think, 1987. And wrote and wrote. And in about 5 years, I had my first novel. And in 13 years, I got a novel published. But it really was just me swapping from one branch of the tree to another branch. And it was writing novels is like it's making a movie on your own with unlimited budget. So you do whatever you want. It's great. You can have dodos. It's easy. If you want a dodo, just write it in. If you want a dodo in a movie, the producer is going to go, well, could we use it? Could we have a chicken instead? I mean, the chickens are good. Chickens are funny. Do we really have to have a dodo? They're very expensive. It's quite interesting. The Quark Beast you mentioned in the intro earlier was about the Last Dragon Slayer was made into a film, and they didn't know what to do with the Quark Beast, which is a character within the book who is incredibly fearful to look at. And clearly this was a budgetary issue that they never got their heads around. But the Quark Beast in my book works totally, and you just have tremendous control in novels that you would never have in movies.
And in your case, if you want a dodo, you just stick it on the headless mannequin behind you for the Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, where is it? I can't pointing to it. There we go. My little dodo head there. I thought, wouldn't it be funny? I did it as a Christmas card. We all dressed up as animals for a Christmas card about 3 or 4 years ago. And I thought, I wonder if anyone does a dodo head, a latex dodo head that you can wear. And of course they do. Of course they do. And it's been in my studio ever since. It's rather good, actually. It's a very good dodo head.
I love it. It's brilliant. I'm conscious of the time, and I'd want to make sure that I leave plenty of time for audience questions. So as Chrissy mentioned, you can send any questions that you have for Jasper to her via the chat box. And we'll be going to those shortly. But first, Jasper, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to read us a bit of your book.
Okay. Right. So, to make sure I've got the right glasses on. Yes, I have. Right, so this is, I'll read a little short piece here. So this gives you a little bit of an idea about about sort of the rabbits and their place in the UK and how they're treated by the humans. I think the important thing about rabbits is in the book is they didn't suddenly appear. They've been there for a long time, and my protagonist, Peter Knox, he's grown up with rabbits being there. They're not just suddenly, rabbits have arrived. And I like this idea. They've been there a long time, and the relationship with humans and anthropomorphised rabbits has evolved over the years, and we're at a sort of almost at a sort of final stage in their relationship. So this is about. Peter Knox is on a stakeout. He's on ops in a local town called Ross-on-Wye, and we'll just read a little bit about that. If I keep on going, he's on ops with a rabbit, an earless rabbit who is working also for the compliance task force. He's called Douglas, but he's known as Lugless because of the no ears thing. Ross-on-Wye had a pre-rabbit population of 8,000, all human. Today, that had risen to 20,000, chiefly rabbits. Most were long-term residents, part of an early experiment in rabbit-human integration undertaken in the 70s by Rabtoil, which had initially been set up as an NGO to find employment for rabbits, but had grown and darkened over the years to control all rabbit employment, was now integrated into the Ministry for Rabbit Affairs. The Ross integration experiment, while hugely successful at the time and still regarded as a gold standard for peaceful interspecies coexistence, was never rolled out further owing to a concerted smear campaign by the United Kingdom Anti-Rabbit Party, who despised the concept of integration and instigated numerous complaints about the rabbits' bacchanalian nature of rampant promiscuity that would surely corrupt the nation's youth. Despite no evidence that the nation's youth needed any outside forces to help corrupt itself in the least, UCARP succeeded in casting doubt over further integration and were as surprised as anyone when their plan succeeded and integration plans were abandoned. They used it as a springboard to further pursue their anti-rabbit agenda. No one could have foreseen that they'd actually lead the nation 4 decades later. Before Ross, we had only failure, said a spokesman for UCARP. Afterwards, only success. Despite the leporiphobic rhetoric, the once sleepy market town of Ross was now a bustling centre of commerce, which encompassed trade, crafts and literary and artistic pursuits, as well as 2 centres for higher learning that revolved around philosophy, high cuisine and sustainability. While a few residents initially complained about the rabbits, all were won over by the vibrant nightlife, friendly, upbeat manner of the newcomers, and of course, the trading opportunities. Although rabbits were not paid well, they liked to spend what they earned quickly. The gourmet lettuce bars did particularly well, as did the numerous greengrocers, a thriving bookstore, and several hookah dens where rabbits discussed politics, economics, and carrot hybridization issues, while their hookahs bubbled and puffed with the aromatic scent variety of rabbit tobacco, dock leaf, catnip, burdock, celeriac, and dandelion. Mornings in the hookah den were reserved for performance readings. The one we passed had a reading of The Hunchback of Notre Dame going on all week. More relevant to the Rabbit Compliance Task Force, Ross, by was local statute an open town, commercially, residentially, and crucially for those on a day permit from Rabbit Colony 1, 8 miles to the east. Thanks to a well-intentioned bylaw passed 40 years before, busloads of rabbits could move between the 2 locations without identification checks, something of a headache for RABCOT. The RABCOT is the Rabbit Compliance Task Force, as it made potential free movement of those in the banned rabbit underground that much easier. None of the other colonies enjoyed such freedoms, so it had long been assumed that Colony 1 was where the movement was based. Well, that's a little scrap there. It was a lot of it is about paranoia about rabbits, human paranoia about rabbits, and they're kind of convinced that there's this rabbit underground, which is secretly plotting to use a weaponized promiscuity to overrun the nation with huge quantities of rabbits. Because if you think about how rabbits can multiply, you know, there's obviously a cause for great concern there. Although if they've been here since 1955 and there's only 1 million of them, I think commendable restraint would be a better view of their reproductive habits. Anyway, there's a little bit about the book.
Brilliant, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Chrissy, I might hand to you for questions if we've had any come through at the moment. Otherwise, I've still got plenty here.
We have a heap here, so yeah, I might.
Okay, lovely. Let's hand over to you.
Been very entertaining, and a lot of people have messaged to say that they've been enjoying this talk. But Jasper, there's been a few questions about the rabbit painting behind you, and so I thought I'd ask.
Right. Well, the rabbit painting behind me. Now, eagle-eyed viewers may notice that. Actually, I did say that the Yellow Submarine was in my top 10. Well, another film that's in my top 10 is, of course, Harvey. Harvey with James Stewart, who I adore. I mean, he's just fantastic, and rabbits love James Stewart as well. It's an amazing film. I mean, it's just the most delightful film. And that's the best word. It's delightful. It really is delightful. And at one point, if you haven't seen the film, of course you must. It's James Stewart, and he's a bit of sort of this amenable character who's a bit of a drunk, and he has this invisible white rabbit who is his friend called Harvey, who's like 6'4" high. And this is a great problem to his sister, who's trying to sort of, socially climb with Myrtle May, his niece, and it's a big problem having him in the house, constantly going on about Harvey, his friend rabbit. Anyway, at one point, James Stewart walks in and he takes this painting out of himself and Harvey, and it basically looks exactly like that. So my mother-in-law, Maggie, who is a very talented painter, I asked her if she would paint a portrait of me with Harvey in that mold. So we got some screenshots and we found some publicity material for her to work from, and she made me with Harvey. So there it is.
It's a very fun thing indeed, and
great
a very
fun
film indeed too. I loved that film when I was a kid. Great. So Verity has asked if you're so prolific. Do you write one book at a time, or do you work on several projects at the same time?
Right. Well, let's think. I mean, I've been writing for 19 years, and this is my 15th book. And I was trying to write a book a year, but that didn't really work. I had a bit of a problem with early riser. That was horrible. So I lost a few years. When I was doing a book a year for nearly 11 years, and what I used to do was I used to just steam into it and spend 6 months, 100 days, basically 100, 120 days over 6 months, very, very sort of focused writing. And then the rest of the 6 months would be sort of setting up for the, putting it to bed, getting it edited, thinking about the next book, doing the launch, and then come, December, January, I'd move into the next book and write it. But when I'm writing a book, I'm always thinking about the next book, the ideas, because I'm constantly, as I was talking about that stream of ideas and that connective way in which I have ideas, that's constantly going on. And that's how I write my books. I completely make them up as I'm going along. There's no plan, nothing at all. You just go. I start with my little narrative dare, anthropomorphised rabbits, go, Jasper, just see where it comes out. So I'm always thinking of the next book. And when I'm doing series books with the Thursday Next books, I was kind of semi-thinking about what the next one is going to be about as I'm writing the last one. So although Thursday Next 8 is not out yet and I don't have a plan for it, I do know that it's about the dark reading matter, and we are going to get onto that eventually. So I'm sort of semi-thinking about the next book. Interestingly, this book, The Constant Rabbit, I wrote the first 20,000 words of it when I had a little sort of, give yourself a break, Jasper, over early riser. And I just took a month out because I really like this idea, and the rabbits is a great idea for a book. So I spent a month doing 20,000 words and getting that dinner party sorted out and having fun with that before returning to early riser and eventually finishing it.
Fantastic. You've had quite a few questions about sequels, actually, and particularly whether, Sarah has asked, do you see The Constant Rabbit as a standalone book? And do you plan sequels to this, or any of your other books that maybe would have had sequels to them? Are they coming up too?
Yeah, I don't see The Constant Rabbit as having a a sequel, I don't see where it can go. I think I've kind of said all I wanted to say within it. I think so. I don't think Connie and Peter wouldn't feature. There could be a sort of spin-off novella within the world. I suppose I could do that, but I think it works actually as a standalone. But then all my series were standalone. So the Last Dragon Slayer, standalone. The Air Affair, standalone. So I always start off with a standalone, and then it kind of I create this world and think, well, why not do a sequel? So as I've already said, the Air Affair, the Thursday Next series, there will be an 8th in that one, because 7 is a really bad number to stop, and it just doesn't work. And I do want to sort out the dark reading matter and all that kind of stuff. And she will be like about 62 by then, because what's quite fun with Thursday is she's kind of aged throughout the series, and I think now we get to the point where her children, she might actually start being a granny, which would be quite next, granny next, and that will bring a nice sort of loop. If anyone knows the series, they'll bring a nice sort of loop around there. Shades of Grey. This is a question that comes up again and again and again. Jasper, when are you going to do the sequel of Shades of Grey? Interestingly, see, now Shades of Grey, I really thought this was my own first personal novel. This is what's interesting for me, is because the 6 books up until then, there were 4 Thursday books and the 2 nursery crime books, and they were essentially rearranging the furniture in people's heads. This was stuff that was already out there. I was using characters that already existed, and now I was making new situations around existing characters. So for me, Shades of Grey was me writing a novel for the first time, because everything pretty much in it is my own invention, the situation and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, I thought, this is quite good. It's a bit out there, it's a bit weird, but it's a bit sort of original, I hope. And I thought it would do a lot better than it did. It did not do very well. And even today, I think it's only my 4th best-selling book, even if you take into account how many years they've been out, because obviously my bestseller is The Air Affair, because it's been out 20 years. It would be. But if you work it out on a year-by-year basis, Shades of Grey is still only the 4th bestseller. So it hasn't sold particularly well. But of all the books that people want me to write a sequel to, or get on with writing a sequel, because I did kind of vaguely promise that I would, Shades of Grey is the one. So once I've finished Dragon Slayer 4, which is what I'm working on at the moment, because I want to finish that series, then I'll be doing a second book, either a prequel or a sequel to Shades of Grey, so we can know exactly what this weird world they live in is all about, why they are there, what's happening. And whether that will, I don't think it'll be a trilogy. I think probably 2 will do it, but at least there will be a sequel, and we can find out what happens to Eddie and Jane. And then I think following that will be the Thursday sequel. The nursery crime, I didn't think I was going to do another one. I could, obviously, and there are a few ideas kicking around. But I do like writing standalones as well. And I think it's trying to have a good mix. But for the moment, the plan is finish 3 series. So right. Dragon Slayer, Shades of Grey, and then Thursday Next 8. And that's my plan for the next 3 years.
You did have questions about Shades of Grey, so you have covered that. Thank you very much. You've got a question here about the title, The Constant Rabbit, and what that references and where you got the title from.
Yeah, I really like this title. So, The Constant Rabbit. So, there was a subplot which I was kind of using at one point, which is only really left in the names of Mr. and Mrs. Rabbit. It's Constance and Clifford, which is from Lady Chatterley's Lover. And there was a sort of, there was a kind of, Mellors the gardener kind of thing that came in for a bit. And then I was going, nah, that doesn't work. And it went out. But she was remaining, she did get called Connie, as in Constance. And then I thought about having them had a kind of semi-relationship before. And then this idea of the constant rabbit is that she still holds a flame for him, and that works quite well. So she's the constant rabbit. But it's also a question about the constant rabbit. Rabbit, I'm sure you use the same slang. Rabbit is like endless chat. and the saying, the constant rabbit, just means endlessly talking, just banging on about, but never actually doing anything. And I think that was part of, you know, one of my criticisms labelled at not just Britain but the British, is that they talk about, oh yes, well we must be more encompassing, we must do these things, you know, oh, of course we will, and it's the constant rabbit. It really is. So I think that was probably, you know, I think it's a good title. So there's sort of threefold there, you know, her constancy, and also the endless bunny that we have in, you know, part of the national dialogue about doing better when we kind of don't.
There's a question from Liz here who says that animals are better beings than humans in your books, and it seems quite Orwellian. Were you influenced by George Orwell?
Yeah, I mean, I purposefully didn't. I mean, obviously, you're talking about Animal Farm. I purposely didn't read it again. I mean, I read it a very long time ago, and was sort of, you know, knocked over it by I think more than anything else by the unsubtlety with which you can do allegory. I mean, it's such an unsubtle allegory, but I think that's the whole thing about allegory. And this is not a subtle book, but then we don't live in subtle times. So I think there was probably subconsciously sort of taking that. But the animals in Animal Farm, or rather, you know, the pigs, they become, you know, more and more human-like. But there are references. I think there's a hominid supremacist group in the Constant Rabbit that's called Two Legs Good, as a nod, obviously, to Animal Farm. Yeah, I don't think majorly so. But you know, animals making better humans than humans. Yeah, definitely. I think definitely.
Celia has also asked about animals in your books, and has said that does you write them so well, and does this arise from writing fantasy, or is it just the fun of it? Like
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because, you know, I'm not a rabbit, clearly, yet I'm putting myself, you know, I'm inventing how rabbits should talk and how they are and how they, you know, and everything like that. I think the interesting thing about fantasy, and why I find fantasy one of the most exciting genres, is that it's experimental. It's very, very experimental, and you can do things in fantasy that you can't do in almost any other genre. If you want to have anthropomorphised rabbits, you know, talking about, you know, carrot hybridization issues, then you can do that, and that's, you know, that's not a big deal. And there was somebody said to me the other day, you've got someone sort of pretending to be a stereotypical Yorkshireman, and that's, you know, not something that you'd ever use in a book. But within a fantasy book, you can do that with absolutely no problem at all, because it fits within the overall framework. And I think that's what's great about fantasy, is that once you set your parameters about what kind of is acceptable and what isn't, then you can introduce very, very bizarre ideas, and they fit within the logic of the world, and people just go, yep, I'll buy into that, and it can really, really work. But I also think that that fantasy is often the kind of sandbox for ideas, and that fantasy writers, and by fantasy I kind of mean, you know, any fantastical kind of writer. In science fiction, I think sort of fits into that umbrella of just making up these bizarre and amazing worlds, is that quite often those ideas filter up into mainstream work, and you can have ideas like this suddenly appearing, you know, 5 or 10 years later in more mainstream works, where perhaps, you know, they have a bigger reach, but still work. So we're kind of, you know, I think fantasy is like, you know, often an R&D lab for other genres, but it's great fun as well, because there's conventions, but no real rules. You can just do what you want, and, you know, you want talking rabbits, you got them. It's easy. Just make it plausible, and that's the thing. It's not making it impossible. It's making it plausible. Then everyone will buy into it, and after a while, you forget that they're rabbits, or you forget it's Humpty Dumpty, or you forget that, you know, it's impossible to travel into books. Ooh, spoiler alert! And you just go with it. And there's this, you can just take readers on this journey anywhere you want. And it's tremendous. I love it.
Well, rabbits are very David Lynchian as well, aren't they? He uses rabbits in his work as well. So they can be quite dark as well as quite fun, which is great.
Yeah, they are. It's strange. I mean, we humans have a very, very odd relationship with rabbits because we have them as, pets, and we love them, and, they're cute, and, we breed them, and, and if you were to be cruel to a pet rabbit, you could end up in the dock here in the UK. I don't know what rules are like over in Oz, but then you also murder them in their tens of millions in the most unpleasant way possible. I mean, any possible unpleasant way of killing something you can imagine has probably been done to a rabbit. And we've used them in experimentation and still do, and yet have this incredibly sort of strange, confused relationship, which I think is why rabbits in this book work quite well, because there is also, there's nods towards the relationship that humans have with animals that I mentioned before, and also a sense of almost a kind of sort of vegetarian sort of track to it about rights of animals. How shouldn't animals have some sort of rights? And there are many people who believe they absolutely should. And I think somebody says at some point that viewed objectively, who's to say that a human has any more right to life than lichen? and you go, well, yeah, okay, I love my children, and I'd choose them over lichen any day of the week, without missing a heartbeat. But viewed objectively as life on the, this biosphere, why do we have the dominant say? We are all hominid supremacists.
Yep, we're fond of lichen. Yeah. We're running out of time, so I'm going to hand back to Emma Kate to finish off for tonight. So thank you very much. And there's more questions, but I think that we'll go back to Emma Kate for a final sign off.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to say thank you so much, Jasper, for talking to me tonight. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Please do head to that link that Chrissy has provided you and go and grab your copy of The Constant Rabbit. You should take advantage of that deal, which she's posted there as well. You can get 10% off on our website tonight. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Jasper, again, and thank you for the reading. Did you have any final comments that you would like to make to the audience tonight before Chrissy takes everybody off mute and unleashes the
No, just stay well, stay safe, be vigilant, be nice to other people and rabbits.
And I'm going to make everybody unmute themselves now so that we can do a final clap. That's been really great. Thank you so much. You're all allowed to unmute yourself for a clap. So thank you.
everyone.
We haven't had that on any other. Really nice.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. See you later, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.